Hi everyone, welcome back to Garden Haven Homestead. My name is Michelle and today I'm going to be talking about vegetables that you can grow to save money on your grocery bill. Whether you are a new gardener who is thinking about putting in a new garden in your backyard in order to grow some of your own homegrown vegetables, or if you've been gardening for a few years but you just want to grow things that are going to save you the most money as possible, because let's be real, we've all seen the prices at the grocery store these days and it wouldn't hurt to save as much as you can. I'm going to cover a few different vegetables that you can consider growing. I'm also going to talk about things that you might want to avoid if your goal is to save money, and also some tips on how to choose what varieties you should grow. Please don't mind this wonderful purple glow in the background as I do this video. We are in seed starting season right now, so the grow lights have to be on for the seedlings to grow because those seedlings are going to be the future vegetables for our garden, so I need to make sure they grow up really nice and strong. So we're gonna have a little bit of like a purple ambiance here, but it's all good, we're going with it. So let's get into it. First I'm gonna talk about 5 vegetables that I think you should grow if your goal is to save money, and I'll probably also have a bonus one in there because I can never narrow it down to just 5 things. The first thing on my list is tomatoes. Tomatoes are probably everybody's first foray into gardening because everybody knows that a homegrown tomato is so much better than a store-bought one. And it also helps that tomato plants are pretty prolific. So if you put just a single tomato plant in your garden, you'll probably end up with lots of tomatoes. This will depend on the variety of tomato you're putting in. So if your goal is to produce as many tomatoes as possible, then I would highly suggest going for a productive variety rather than an heirloom variety that is prized for its taste rather than the volume of tomatoes it grows. I would also really recommend growing cherry tomatoes because you can get a lot of cherry tomatoes off of a single plant. And if you have a larger space where you can grow lots of tomato plants, they're also a really great vegetable that is easy to preserve. Diced tomatoes was one of my first things that I learned to can, and it's a very versatile thing that you can use in your cooking. But if you're not into canning, you can also just make a simple tomato sauce and freeze that in containers, and then you don't have to deal with canning. Another thing I like to do is to dehydrate or freeze cherry tomatoes, and you can just freeze cherry tomatoes whole and they freeze really well. You wouldn't want to eat them fresh afterwards because they would be very soft and watery, but they are really great to throw into soups, and I also like to use them in quiche. So definitely a very versatile vegetable and a no-brainer to grow if you're looking to grow something that is productive, but you can also do a lot of different things with it. And again, if you are looking to get as many tomatoes as possible, make sure you're looking for a production variety rather than an heirloom variety. If you're into preserving, I would definitely recommend looking into determinate tomatoes because those tend to put a lot of their tomatoes out at the same time, so it's easier for you to get enough tomatoes to do something with. But if you're looking for something that's going to produce over the season and kind of get you through the entire summer with some homegrown tomatoes, then I would recommend maybe a cherry tomato. One of my favorites for cherry tomatoes is the Sun Gold tomato. It is a really delicious, super sweet snacking tomato. And for production tomatoes and ones for preserving, I really like growing Roma tomatoes and also a hybrid tomato called BHN 1021 that I get from Johnny's Seeds. The second vegetable I would recommend are zucchini and summer squash, and this is probably not going to be a surprise to anyone. Everyone always talks about how productive zucchini plants are, and this is especially true if you are starting a brand new garden. I would really recommend growing a zucchini plant. The reason I think that they're better for new gardens is because there are certain bugs that make growing zucchini kind of challenging sometimes. I've actually had very mixed success with zucchini because we have both squash bugs and squash vine borers, and if you have an infestation of those things, they can completely demolish your crop. But generally speaking, a lot of people do have very good success with growing zucchini, and a single plant or a couple of plants is going to give you plenty of zucchini to eat fresh and to preserve if you have extra. If you're someone that doesn't really like to eat zucchini fresh, I think there's still a lot of merit to growing zucchini because there are ways that you can use it that might be more appealing to you if you don't like to eat it fresh. For example, I grated and froze a lot of my zucchini last year, and that has just been a staple for us this winter. I have thrown it in so many things. I've shown a lot of different uses for it in a lot of my cooking videos, so you can check those out if you're looking for different uses for shredded zucchini. Obviously, it's really good for zucchini bread, but you can also throw it into casseroles. I've made some Korean style vegetable pancakes with them. I also throw it into soups and tomato sauce, so there are lots of different ways for you to use that zucchini to bulk up your other meals, which will help you save money on more expensive ingredients. For example, I always like to throw some shredded zucchini in to kind of bulk up any meat that I'm going to cook because meat is more expensive and that zucchini helps it to stretch farther. Some of my favorite zucchini varieties that I grew last year are the Golden Glory and Emerald Delight zucchinis. Another bonus about growing homegrown zucchini is that you'll be able to pick some squash blossoms, which would be difficult if not impossible to find at the grocery store, and you can make some really delicious squash blossom fritters out of those. Next on my list is going to be just the wide category of herbs, because herbs are definitely a great and easy thing to grow in your garden. And I'm talking everything from the more tender herbs like dill, cilantro, parsley, and basil, but I'm also including the hardier herbs like rosemary, sage, and thyme. Any herb that you can grow is going to be really worth it in terms of maintenance and space. Generally speaking, they don't take up a lot of space. A lot of these herbs are really easy to grow from seed. I would stick to kind of like the more tender herbs for those, but for the hardier herbs, I would recommend starting with a plant start because those can take a long time to start from seed. And a lot of the hardier herbs are also perennial in a lot of zones. For our zone, which is zone 7A, thyme, sage, rosemary, and oregano are all pretty hardy. They will make it through most winters. And each year, if the plants do make it through the winter, they will get bigger each year too. And herbs are one thing that are pretty expensive in the grocery store, especially those hardier herbs. Anytime I go to the grocery store and I see those little containers of herbs, I'm always astounded that like 2 sprigs of rosemary can cost a few bucks when you can have like a whole bush growing outside. I also love that a lot of these herbs are really beautiful, so you can use them kind of like in your front gardens or your landscaping as well. It doesn't just have to be in your vegetable garden. They're very beautiful, and then you can just like go out and snip some herbs anytime you need to use them for dinner. They're just such a great and easy thing to grow, and I think of them almost like a value add to your cooking, because even though you're usually not eating herbs alone, they enhance the other food that you're cooking and make it so much better. And I definitely think that they are worthwhile to grow in your garden. Next on the list is going to be lettuce. And lettuce is probably the most expensive vegetable in the grocery store based on weight. A single bag or clamshell container of lettuce can cost you like $4 to $5, and lettuce is super easy to grow at home. It also doesn't take a very long time to grow lettuce. Most of them only take a couple of months to grow from seed. And when I'm talking about lettuce, I'm talking about any kind of green that you can pick as like a young tender green that you can use in salad mixes. So this category is going to be not only like romaine and loose leaf type lettuces, but also things like kale, spinach, and arugula, maybe even some Swiss chard or beet greens, anything that grows really quickly. And you can pick all of those tender little leaves and make your own salad mix. Is going to be a great way to save money, because again, those salad mixes are really expensive, and I also find that they don't have a very good shelf life when you buy them from the grocery store. So if you have your own fresh supply in your garden and you can just pick those greens when you need to use them, then you're not going to be wasting as much food, and that will help you save money as well. Number 5 on the list is going to be peppers, and this is especially going to be true if you live in a warmer climate where you have a really long growing season. We live in a climate where we have fairly warm summers, and our growing season is pretty long as well. I think we have like almost 200 days in our growing season, so it's a great area for us to grow peppers because they really like the heat. If you grow in a cooler or more northern climate, it might be a little trickier, but I still think that they're worth putting on the list, because one thing about peppers is that they are one of the vegetables that are on the Dirty Dozen list, which are the vegetables that have the highest residue of pesticides if you don't buy them organic. So conventional peppers are one thing that I try not to buy from the grocery store, and I always try to buy the organic version. But if you're buying organic peppers, they are extremely expensive, and you can pay a couple of bucks per pepper. So if you live in an area where you can grow them pretty well, I definitely think that they're worth it. One thing I would suggest if you're really looking for production, or if you live in a place where you have a shorter growing season, is try to find smaller varieties of peppers. I find that those types of varieties where the peppers are smaller, they tend to produce more peppers, so you'll be able to get a lot more peppers per plant. Some of my favorite pepper varieties for a smaller pepper are going to be shishito peppers. They are super productive, and for larger peppers, I really like the Ajvarski pepper. They do pretty well for a large pepper, and the flavor is also really delicious. So those are 5 different vegetables that I think will save you a lot of money if you grow them in your own garden. I also have 2 kind of like bonuses or honorable mentions that I want to bring up. The first thing is going to be berries, specifically strawberries. I think any kind of berry you grow is going to be really worth it and save you a lot of money. Fruit is one of the more expensive things, at least on our own grocery bill, anytime we go to the store, and any kind of fruit that you can grow on your own at home is really going to gonna help with that part of our grocery budget. And I think berries in particular are a great way to tackle that part of our budget. The only reason that they're not in like the top 5 is that sometimes it can take a couple of years for you to start getting a good yield. For example, raspberries and blackberries, a lot of times you won't get anything until the 2nd or 3rd year. So the one berry that I want to mention are strawberries. I think that these are a really easy berry for many home gardeners to grow. And I find that you will usually get berries that first year. You might not get as many, but you will probably still get something. And usually the 2nd year and beyond, I find that the plants really start to do really well, and you will have like 10 times as many berries as you did the first year. So those are a great thing to get in your garden right now because you'll still get something immediately, but it's kind of like an investment because then you know that the next year you'll get more strawberries. Another great thing about strawberries is that they put off runners, and you can take those little runners and start new strawberry plants. So if you start off with just a few plants, each year you can kind of multiply your own crop, and you'll never have to buy strawberry plants again or start anything from seed. So that's really awesome. You don't even need a very large space to get a really good yield of strawberries. We had 2 strawberry beds when we first moved to this house, and I think the 2 beds were about 3 feet by 4 feet. And that first year we got like gallons and gallons of strawberries. We froze so many of them. If you get enough, you can also make strawberry jam and enjoy that throughout the winter. I like to freeze them and use them in smoothies. And of course we eat lots of them fresh, and we also bake with them. And the second bonus item that I wanted to mention is asparagus. And again, this didn't make the main list because it will take a few years for you to start harvesting asparagus, but I think it's well worth putting in now in your garden so that you can enjoy it in future years. This is going to be a perennial. It's going to come back every year, and it's going to produce asparagus spears in the spring. Asparagus is a very seasonal vegetable, and it tends to be pretty expensive in the stores. I also find that store-bought asparagus is pretty woody, and homegrown asparagus is very sweet and tender. So I think for that like quality difference, it's nice to grow it at home, and it's also very low maintenance. Once you plant it that first year, it's gonna come up every year on its own, and you don't really have to do anything to it. So I definitely think it's one of those vegetables that's an investment, but if you put it in this first year, in a few years you'll be able to start reaping the benefits, and for many years after that, those asparagus plants will keep producing. So that is it for my list of things that I would recommend growing if your goal is to save money. And now I also have some things that I want to quickly talk about to maybe avoid, and this list is really only if you're trying to save money and that's the only reason you're gardening. There are things I'm going to mention that are actually some of my favorite things to grow, but I know that they're not necessarily the best like investment of time, space, or money. I just really like to grow them. But again, if you're just trying to slash down your grocery bills every month, maybe avoid these few vegetables. First off, I'm gonna say probably don't grow corn. I don't think that the space that you have to commit to corn is worth it. They also need a lot of fertilizer, and every year my corn falls down from some kind of summer storm. A lot of new gardeners, or if you have a small space, also have trouble with corn pollinating correctly, and even at best you'll probably only get like 2 ears of corn per stalk. So I don't really think it's worth it. Just find a really nice farm nearby where you can pick up some fresh corn, and that's gonna be more worth your time. I also don't necessarily think it's worth it to grow homegrown carrots or onions. These are 2 things that are either a little trickier to grow or take a pretty long time, and I think the store-bought vegetables are just as good as homegrown vegetables. I don't know if that's a hot take or not, but honestly, sometimes homegrown carrots don't even taste as good as store-bought carrots. And also carrots and onions tend to be pretty cheap as well. So I would say just buy the store-bought ones and maybe save your garden space for something that's going to save you more money, like tomatoes or peppers. I would also include things like broccoli and cabbage on the avoid list, simply because they do take up quite a bit of space, and you don't really end up with too much vegetable for the amount of space that you are committing to it. Usually for a broccoli plant, you will get like 1 head of broccoli and maybe some side shoots as well, and then for a cabbage plant you'll get 1 head of cabbage. But in that same amount of space, you could probably grow a zucchini plant that is going to give you buckets and buckets of zucchini. Lastly, I would probably avoid anything that involves shelling. Things like dried beans, shelling peas, cowpeas, anything like that, because there is just so much effort that goes into the shelling, and also you lose a lot of the volume of the vegetables as you're shelling. I also think that a lot of these things, again, tend to just be cheaper and just as good from the grocery store Frozen green peas are awesome from the grocery store, and also dried beans are super cheap as well. So anytime you can buy something from the grocery store that's already pretty cheap, it might not be worth your money if you're trying to save money to grow it by yourself at home. Lastly, I just have some overall tips if you're trying to decide what kind of stuff to grow. First of all, I would recommend just looking at the things you normally buy from the grocery store, and if some of those things are some of the vegetables that I listed that I recommend growing, then that's great. You can go ahead and try growing those. But if, as I was going through this list, you thought, I don't normally eat a lot of those things, that's totally fine. Maybe look at the stuff that you already buy and see if you can find substitutes and figure out things that are easier to grow. For example, while I wouldn't really recommend growing carrots to save money, you could always substitute other root vegetables like radishes, beets, or turnips. I find that all of those things are much faster and easier to grow than carrots are, especially radishes. They are super fast and you can cook them in a lot of similar ways. You can kind of just have them raw in salads, or you can roast them. Or for example, say you buy a lot of spinach from the store, maybe you could try growing something like kale in your garden. I find that kale is a lot easier to grow than spinach, and it can take a good amount of time to like pick all of those individual spinach leaves, but you can grow kale to have much larger leaves and use it in a lot of the same ways. So just try and be creative, and if you can't grow the exact things you're already eating, maybe you can find some easy substitutes to include in your garden. So that is my list and my recommendations and tips if you are trying to save money by growing your own garden. If I missed anything, or if you disagree with anything that I mentioned, please leave a comment down below. I would love to hear your thoughts, and let me know if you have any specific vegetables or varieties that you would recommend. But I hope you enjoyed this video. I will be growing pretty much everything that I mentioned, whether it's on the grow list or the don't grow list. So if you want to follow along this gardening season and see how everything turns out, make sure you subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again in the next video.